In the previous video, we learned about the history of the Canary Islands indigenous people from their arrival to the archipelago over 2,500 years ago to the beginning of the end of their society. In part 2, we'll be focusing on an event that took place over the course of the entire 1400s, culminating in the loss of one group of people and birthing the foundations of another's empire. This is the conquest of the Canary Islands, Europe's first taste of imperialism and colonialism. As mentioned before, the 1300s saw various European states begin their expansion outwards. With new trading routes along the North African coast, an improvement of navigational technology and the launch of new expeditions to chart unmarked lands, the Canary Islands quickly found themselves in the sights of pre-unified Spanish kingdoms, namely Majorca and Castile, the Republic of Genoa and the Portuguese crown. By the late 1300s, raids on the islands became ever more frequent, as did missionary work from the Catholic Church. In 1402, John de Bethancourt and Godefroy de la Salle, two Norman nobles operating as vassals for the King of Castile, Henry III, launched their conquest from the port of La Rochelle in modern-day France. Their aims were largely economical, as Bethancourt owned various textile factories and dye works, and the Canaries by this time were known to be a source for such items. Bethancourt and company arrived on Lanzarote in the summer of 1402 and quickly overran the island. A diocese was set up near Playa Blanca and the island's capital was established in the town of Teguise. From here, Bethancourt then planned the next conquest, which was to be Lanzarote's closest neighbour, Fuerteventura. Bethancourt assaulted the island the same year, but this time internal conflict and resource issues would mean the conquest would take much longer. In 1404, Bethancourt returned to Spain to gather more troops and equipment for further campaigns into the island's interior, and after nearly 3 years the Machel tribe were overwhelmed by the Castilian and Norman forces and ultimately defeated. The internal conflicts which substantially delayed the campaign was largely down to two rebellions during Bethancourt's time in Spain. Godefroy de la Salle, the other Norman nobleman, was forced to deal with the rogue commander, Bertin de Berneval, who had restarted the capture of slaves and also a Machel resistance to this practice. The conquest ended in 1405 after the surrender of the island's indigenous kings, and Bethancourt was proclaimed King of the Canaries by the Crown of Castile. The final chapter in the Bethancourt era of the conquest of the Canary Islands was the invasion of El Hierro in 1405. Little is known about this phase of the campaign, but it's believed the island fell relatively quickly and without any real resistance, perhaps due to its small size and likely even smaller population, who, after their surrender, were sold into slavery. El Hierro was subsequently repopulated with Norman and Castilian settlers. Sometime in 1412, Bethancourt left the islands and returned to France, leaving his possessions in the hands of his nephew, Massieu de Bethancourt. The same was the case for Godefroy, who returned to Spain to contest the decision that Bethancourt was proclaimed King of the Canaries. His appeal was unsuccessful and he never returned to the islands. In 1418, Massieu de Bethancourt sold his holdings of the Canaries to Enrique Pérez de Guzman with extended rights to subjugate the remaining islands. It's noted that the King of Castile became more heavily involved and the islands changed ownership on numerous occasions between 1418 and 1445. During these intermittent years, various struggles between the natives and conquistadors ensued, and in one occasion forced the retreat of the new settlers from El Hierro and temporarily re-established the Bimbache order, this being the name of the local tribe to only El Hierro. However, under a new territorial lord named Hernan Peraza, a second successful conquest was launched in 1450, and this time placed the island under the holdings of the Castilian crown. In this period, La Gomera too was occupied, making it the fourth of the islands to come under Castile control. The initial occupation saw no resistance from the natives, but subsequent rebellions would take place due to ill treatment and acts of barbarity against the islanders. All of these local uprisings would fail to remove the Crown of Castile's influence, with the final one in 1488 seeing many Gomeros sold into slavery after the death of Hernan Peraza's grandson in battle. The next phase of the conquest commenced in 1478 with the invasion of Gran Canaria. A force led by Captain Juan Rejon and Dian Bermudez arrived on La Ileta on the northeastern corner of the island and founded the settlement of Real de las Palmas, near the location of the modern-day Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, the capital city. The first battle ensued shortly after, resulting in a defeat for the Canary Islanders. From 1478 to 1481, fighting between the invaders and islanders continued in the mountainous interior of the island. The task of taking Gran Canaria was proving to be the most difficult to date, with a lack of available men and resources too hampering Castilian efforts. In these 3 years, the campaign would oversee 3 separate leaders of the invading force. It was only when extra forces from La Gomera arrived that eventually the Castilians were able to gain the upper hand, and Doramas, a Guanche leader, was killed in the Battle of Arucas in the north of the island. On the 29th of April 1483, the Queen of Gran Canaria surrendered and 2 of her war chiefs committed suicide by jumping from a cliff rather than facing capture to the invaders. This event ended the Canary resistance and left only 2 islands remaining, La Palma and Tenerife. The conquest of La Palma started on the 29th of September 1492 with the arrival of the Castilians to Tazacorte on the island's western side. The campaign was carried out relatively quickly with only small resistance from a Guanche leader, Tanasu, who would eventually be captured as a prisoner. Other Guanche chiefs and leaders made use of previous pacts and agreements with the Castilians, which granted them equal rights to avoid such a fate. The conquest ended in 1493 with much of the native population again sold into slavery or integrated into the new society, demonstrating a clear betrayal of their previous settlements. And finally, we come to Tenerife, the last island to be subjugated and by far the most difficult of all the campaigns. Even though the official dates of the conquest regard 1494 as the start, there had been a previous failed attempt to annex the island in 1464, and with 1496 regarded as the end date, Tenerife remained defiant for 32 years. The leader of this campaign was Alonso Fernández de Lugo, the same conquistador given the rights to lead the conquest of La Palma and who was heavily involved in fighting at Gran Canaria. The 2,000-strong invading force landed at the site of modern-day Santa Cruz de Tenerife. Initially, the Castilians attempted to negotiate with Bencomo, a Guanche king of the resistance, but when no agreement could be made, a clash between the two sides was inevitable. The first battle took place at Acentejo, in which the Guanches won a major victory by ambushing the invaders and nearly wiping out the entire force, including Alonso Fernández de Lugo himself. Lugo managed to escape to Gran Canaria after the carnage and would later return with another force, this time stronger and better prepared. At the Battle of Aguirre, also known as the Battle of San Cristobal de la Laguna, Lugo's army confronted Bencomo once again, with victory going to the Castilians. The last important battle in the conquest of Tenerife followed around 1 month later with the second Battle of Acentejo. A force of up to 6,000 Guanches awaited near the site of the first battle and were pitted against Lugo's 700 Castilians and perhaps as many as 800 Guanche allies who had joined his ranks. The battle concluded after 3 hours of fighting with a victory for the Crown of Castile and the final worthy resistance of the Guanche forces. On the 25th of July 1496, the native kings of Tenerife officially surrendered to Lugo in the Orotava Valley in the north of the island, completing the Spanish rule over the whole archipelago. The Guanches, who had ruled the islands for nearly a millennia, were no more. The ones who had survived the fighting were either sold into slavery, executed, or forced to convert to Christianity and into mixed marriages with European settlers. Within a few more generations, no pure Guanche people remained, and any last semblances of their culture disappeared into history. Some scholars have labelled the conquest of the Canary Islands as a genocide and the earliest examples of European imperialism. The Canary Islands towards the latter end of the 15th century and beyond became a common stopover for European ships sailing onwards to the Americas, where much of the atrocities committed against the Guanches would be repeated on the Native Americans. The story of the Guanches is little known outside of the Canary Islands, and yet it remains a pivotal moment in history. The indigenous peoples of the archipelago were sadly the first victims of the new European taste for conquest that would last for hundreds more years and affect every continent on Earth. Had the Guanches defeated the Spanish over the course of the 15th century, then it may have changed the mindset of other European powers not wanting to risk the mistakes of the Castilians. But by being outnumbered, outmaneuvered and at the mercy of better firearm technology, the Guanches' fate was likely sealed from the very earliest of the conquest campaigns. This video has been substantially longer than normal, so I think now is a good time to wrap things up and conclude by saying that the Guanches today are viewed in a positive light by many Canarians who have adopted the term as a way of self-identification. Their stories are still told throughout the islands, and many people and places bear the names of old indigenous kings and leaders. In addition to this, it's thought that as much as 30% of native-born Canary Islanders of Spanish heritage have at least some Guanche DNA in them. And so, while pure-blood Aboriginal Islanders may be long gone, their legacy lives on in the hearts, minds, and even bodies of the modern Canarians today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video on the Canary Islands' fascinating backstory. Thank you to all viewers and subscribers, and I'll see you next time.